Okay, so we're going to start off by taking off the remaining material that was on the vehicle. And we're going to get all the little bits off that we can. We want to get it down to as bare and clean as possible. So on this one, on the top, it had this foam that was glued down. So I flipped it over and started picking at it. That didn't really work that well. So I decided to get my drill, a little wire wheel, and I started to just sand it off like you see here. I realized that was horribly messy, so I grabbed the shop vac and I continued on with this. It was still kind of messy. The shop vac was, walking around the table, so I had to keep cleaning it up. Eventually, a little bit later in this video, you'll see I got smart and taped it to the desk. But I'm gonna go ahead and let this play through. So as you can see, the surface was actually really clean under there, way cleaner than I expected, and it was also even really smooth. There's the tape I was talking about. You want to make sure you get the bottom edges pretty well too, because we're actually going to fold over our new material onto the bottom and make sure that it's going to adhere to the bottom. So you want it kind of clean too. So next step, I'm going to sand it. It's 120 grit. Pretty simple. You just want to make sure it's all scratched up, because that'll give the glues and the resins something to adhere to, so your fabric won't release. Won't release from the armrest, or whichever part you're doing, honestly. Okay, now I'm going to wipe it off with a microfiber, just getting little bits of dust off. I'm going to throw down a couple sheets of paper. I'm going to spray it with a little bit of glue. In hindsight, I should have cut the fabric before spraying it to size, but I didn't do that, so you're going to see me fumble around with it. So I've already sprayed it at this point. It just didn't really pick up that well on the camera. I'm going to fold it over it, try to get as many creases out of the fabric as I can. Flip it over, and this is why I said you should probably actually cut the fabric beforehand, because now you're going to see me fumble with this, trying not to pull it up at the same time. Now I'm going to put the paper back down, because I'm going to spray the edges and the bottom a little bit and roll over the fabric, trying to keep as many creases out, wrinkles out, trying to keep it as smooth as I can on the sides of the armrest, and make sure I don't introduce any wrinkles. And you want to go real light with the glue also, because if you do too much glue, too heavy of a glue, it will actually act as like a mold release, and in the sun you can have the material start releasing from the, there's my phone, start releasing from the whatever part you're covering. I actually had that happen to me when I was learning to do carbon fiber skins. So I let it dry for a good while, because I had to come back and trim this up. You want to make sure that the glue is really good and dry, so you reduce the risk of pulling up any fabric. If it's still wet, you'll pull it up, and then you're going to have to start the process over a little bit. You're going to have to respray, re-roll, and all that good stuff. Snapped the tip off my blade, got a fresh blade. So you can see I'm trying to keep, just a little roll around the armrest. Trying to take care to make sure all the little strings are cut before pulling. I'm just pinching down the corners to make sure that anything that had lifted is stuck down. Alright, so now I laid out some wax paper and I'm going to hot glue a little piece of plastic to the bottom. In hindsight, I should have done a can because this glue actually, or the piece of plastic melted a little bit when I blew out the bubbles with the torch. So use like a can or something. And so what I'm doing here is I'm making sure to get a good coat of resin on the inside edges of the armrest so it adheres and gives like a mechanical lock to the layer. Just patting it in, making sure the fabric absorbs it pretty good. Alright, now we're going to flip it over. I'm going to put a little bit on the top and I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure that the resin gets deep penetration on the, that's what she said, on the fabric. You want to make sure it goes through it because depending on the fabric that you're working with, sometimes you put the resin on top and it won't actually soak through. It'll just kind of sit on top. So then you'll have really no adhesion, no bond. So make sure the first coat you go ahead and just rub everything in with a brush. You can pick those brushes up at Walmart for like, I don't know, 50 cents. The resin I'm using is a 2-part clear epoxy resin. You can get them at craft stores, you can get them on Amazon, different kits and stuff like that. I'm fortunate enough that I have a boat place near me that sells different epoxies and polyester resins, and I actually go to them for their tabletop epoxy resin. This is actually some old stuff. I don't remember who made that resin specifically that I'm using, but I was just trying to finish up that cup. So there's the blowtorch I was talking about. It gets out any micro bubbles that come to the surface. It's just a little propane torch. So this is after it dried. And you can see where a crease came through, some of the edges lifted. You can see just kind of the texture of it. So there's the piece of plastic I'm getting rid of because that was horrible. Alright, next step is we're going to sand down the piece. Want to scuff it up real good. You want to avoid any shiny spots. So just keep sanding. Make sure you get the edges really well too. Edges and corners. The reason you're sanding this layer is because it's going to help bond the second layer to the first layer, because Obviously, it didn't come out glossy or crystal clear. Well, it came out clear, but it didn't come out real glossy and high shine like you see a lot of epoxy stuff. So make sure you get those edges. But the texture will allow the resin to seep into the cuts and give it like a mechanical lock. Make sure you get everything really good. Wipe it off real good. You don't want any dust on there. Here's our second batch of resin. Same thing as before, 2-part clear epoxy resin. Mix it up real well. So you don't need a brush on the second coat, honestly. If you have gloves, you can just run your hand over it, because the main thing you're doing is spreading it. I just happen to have a bunch of those brushes because I use them for fiberglass, carbon fiber, epoxy, stuff like that. So I grabbed a brush for the video. Okay, you can see the wrinkles kind of in the epoxy, but if you give it a blowtorch, it'll help get out some of those bubbles and wrinkles and stuff because it thins it out a little bit. So just make sure you get all the edges. Quick little blowtorch. There you go. As it's drying, I did forget to mention, you want to make sure you run your brush or whatever under the edges because it'll cause drips. You can kind of see drips there. I'm going to have to go back in and sand those out and then install it. Looks pretty good. She's pretty much ready to install. The wife gave it the okay, so we're done.